Tonight we drift back through drifting mists and ancient mountain winds to a Japan shaped by war, honor, and the steady footsteps of a young wanderer who would one day carve his name into legend. Tonight's story begins with a single question whispered across the centuries. What becomes of a man who refuses to leave any challenge unanswered? This is the life of Miyamoto Musashi, the undefeated swordsman whose quiet determination shaped not only battles, but the spirit of an entire era. Before we begin, if you're watching from the US, Europe, Canada, Australia, or anywhere else in the world, no matter what time your night has settled in, feel free to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know where you are listening from and what hour your journey into this story begins. Now, settle in. Take a slow breath. Let your room dim, your blankets grow warm, and your mind soften like falling dusk. When you are ready, we step into the quiet fields of feudal Japan, where a boy takes his first steps toward becoming a legend, and the world holds its breath for the man he will become. Morning light crept gently across the quiet valley of Miyamoto village, spilling over sloping roofs and fields, still kissed with mist. The world here moved slowly, softened by the hush of distant mountains and the rhythm of bamboo swaying in the wind. It was in this peaceful cradle of Japan that a child named Takezo, who would one day be known as Miyamoto Musashi, first opened his eyes to the world. The people of the village often whispered about him, how he was unusually tall for his age, how he stared longer than most children, and how his presence felt like the stillness before a storm. Even as a boy, his energy had a wildness to it, as though he were listening for something others could not hear. One quiet morning, before the sun fully lifted above the mountains, Takezo wandered alone into the forest beyond the village. Dew clung to the hems of his clothing, and the earth beneath his bare feet felt cool and rich. He listened to the soft hum of insects beginning their day, the distant bubbling of a stream, and the rustle of wind weaving through cedar branches. This world, untamed, ancient, patient, was his first teacher. As he reached a clearing, he found a fallen branch, thick and sturdy. He lifted it, feeling its weight, its balance, the grain of the wood beneath his fingers. He swung it once, twice, and the air parted with a crisp sound. In that moment, though he could not yet understand why, something in his spirit awakened, a spark quietly shaping the path he would walk for the rest of his life. Far away, an unseen future waited, duels, journeys, hardships, and teachings that would echo through centuries. But for now, he was only a boy standing in the morning light, unaware that the world would one day remember his name. And the forest, ever watchful, whispered back to him, "Begin." As the seasons turned, Takezo's childhood slipped quietly into early youth, and the gentle calm of the valley began to feel too small for the restless energy growing inside him. The villagers often saw him practicing alone in the fields at dusk, his wooden staff carving patterns through the air, slow at first, then faster, as though he were chasing something only he could sense. He was not guided by any master, nor taught the proper stances of swordsmanship. His movements were raw, unshaped, sometimes wild. But within that wildness lived a fierce intuition. He studied the bend of branches in the wind, the spring of the earth beneath his steps, the silence of a hawk waiting before it dives. Nature was still his teacher, and he absorbed its lessons without realizing he was doing so. But even this quiet valley could not escape the tensions of the age. Rumors drifted in from distant roads, of warlords vying for control, of armies gathering, of battles that reshaped entire provinces. Travelers spoke of conscriptions and alliances, of young men proving their worth with steel. These whispers stirred something deep within Takezo, something that felt both frightening and irresistible. One evening he stood at the highest point of the village, watching dark clouds roll slowly across the sky. The distant rumble of thunder felt like drums calling out to him. He tightened his grip on his wooden staff, imagining it was a blade, imagining the unknown paths stretching far beyond the valley walls. Conflict, like a tide, was rising in Japan, and even though he was barely more than a boy, Takezo felt it reaching for him, tugging him toward a destiny he could not yet name. The first embers of challenge had ignited, and soon they would grow into a flame that could no longer be contained. Spring arrived with a brittle stillness that seemed to hang over the entire valley. Cherry blossoms bloomed early, their pale petals drifting through the air like small, delicate warnings. Takezo watched them fall from the branches and scatter across the ground, thinking how easily even the most beautiful things could be swept away. That was when the news came. A messenger from the Shinmen clan rode into the village, his horse coated in dust, his voice fatigued but commanding. The clan was raising men, young, strong, and willing, to support the Toyotomi forces in their march against the Tokugawa. It was a call that echoed across countless towns and villages, shaping the lives of everyone who heard it. Takezo's pulse quickened as the men gathered to listen. Some looked fearful, others determined. A few, hardened by past conflicts, nodded as though war were an old acquaintance. But Takezo felt something different, a pull so deep and instinctive, it was almost frightening. The world beyond the valley was opening, and for the first time it felt within reach. His family tried to reason with him. They told him he was too young, too wild, too untrained. But the more they spoke, the more Takezo felt a rising certainty. He did not crave glory, nor did he understand politics or loyalty to distant lords. What he sought was something internal, something wordless, a test perhaps, a sharpening of spirit, a chance to step beyond the quiet boundaries of his childhood. On a mist-covered morning, before the sun brushed the rooftops with gold, Takezo made his choice. With little more than a wooden staff, a small bundle of supplies, and a heart filled with unshaped determination, he followed the group of departing soldiers down the narrow road leading out of the valley. The village behind him lay silent. No one called his name. No one tried to stop him. It was as though even the valley understood that some journeys began the moment a person stopped resisting them. As he walked, the morning fog curled around his ankles, and the distant sound of marching footsteps grew louder. Ahead lay war, uncertainty, and the first true tests of his spirit. He did not look back. The road to battle stretched long and winding, carrying Takezo and the soldiers through valleys, across rivers, and into lands he had only heard about in passing stories. Villages along the way were tense, their streets lined with families, watching silently as troops marched by. The air felt thick, as though Japan itself were holding its breath. At last, they reached the plains of Sekigahara. Not yet a battlefield, but a vast open stretch of land waiting for history to carve its name into the soil. Dawn was only a faint glow along the horizon as tents rose, banners fluttered, and warriors sharpened blades that would soon taste rain, sweat, and blood. Takezo had never seen so many people gathered for a single purpose. Thousands of men moved like waves, preparing, murmuring prayers, tightening armor, the scent of oiled steel and damp earth mixed with the cold morning mist. He felt small among them, young and untested, but something within him, Some unknown, unshakable pulse kept him steady. As the sun began its slow climb into the sky, a sudden wind tore through the plains, carrying with it the sound of drums. Deep, echoing beats rolled across the land, each one striking the heart like distant thunder. Then came the horns, sharp, urgent, commanding. The battle had begun. What followed was not the romantic clash of heroes he had once imagined. The field exploded into chaos, shout, scream, steel against steel, the tremor of horses charging through mud. Takezo moved instinctively, dodging, striking, surviving. His wooden staff, far from elegant, became an extension of his will. He felt blows rattle up his arms, felt sweat slip into his vision, felt the ground shake beneath his feet. All around him, the world became a storm. And yet, amid the chaos, he noticed something. Fear loosened its grip on him. The noise, the danger, the confusion, they sharpened him instead of breaking him. Every heartbeat became clearer, every decision more precise. It was as though some hidden part of him had been waiting for this moment. But the tide of the battle shifted swiftly. The Toyotomi forces faltered, their lines collapsing like weakened branches in a storm. Cries of retreat filled the air as men broke away, running through mud and smoke. Takezo, breath ragged, body aching, found himself swept along with the survivors. By the time the sun sank behind the mountains, the great battle of Sekigahara was over. Japan had changed forever. Takezo had survived, but the boy who entered the battlefield that morning did not walk away with him. Night fell heavy upon the land after Sekigahara, darker than any night Takezo had known. The defeated Toyotomi forces scattered in all directions, stumbling through forests, rivers, and narrow mountain paths, as the victorious Tokugawa troops swept across the region hunting down those who had escaped. Takezo ran until his legs trembled. Mud clung to his feet, and his breath came in sharp, uneven bursts. The cries of battle still echoed in his ears, mingled with the memory of falling bodies and steel flashing like lightning. He did not know which direction he fled, only that he had to keep moving. At last, when his strength nearly failed him, he stumbled into a dense forest. Towering pines closed around him like silent guardians, their branches whispering in the wind. The underbrush was thick, but the shadows felt safer than the open plains behind him. The forest, ancient and unjudging, offered refuge. For hours he wandered beneath the moonlight filtering through the canopy. His clothes were torn, his hands scraped, his stomach hollow. Yet even in exhaustion, his mind remained sharp, alert to every sound. A snapping twig, the hoot of an owl, the faint rush of a nearby stream. Each sensation wrapped around him slowly, grounding him, reminding him he was still alive. He found a place beside a fallen cedar and sank onto the moss-covered earth. There, for the first time since the battle, he allowed himself to breathe deeply. The scent of pine settled his nerves. The cool earth beneath him eased the tremors in his limbs. But survival brought new challenges. He was now a fugitive, a defeated soldier in a country where the victors sought to erase all traces of their enemies. He would have to move carefully, think differently, and rely on instincts that had begun to awaken during the chaos of battle. As he rested, faint moonlight revealed the bruises blooming across his arms and ribs. His staff, cracked but still intact, lay beside him like a loyal companion. He touched it gently, remembering how it had guided him through the battlefield's storm. In the quiet of the forest, Takezo made a silent vow. If the world demanded strength, he would become strong. If it demanded skill, he would learn. If it demanded resilience, he would rise again and again. The night deepened, wrapping him in its cool embrace. Above him, a single star shone through, a break in the leaves, small but unwavering. Takizo closed his eyes, letting the forest lull him toward a fragile, much-needed rest. Morning crept slowly into the forest, its pale light slipping between branches and waking birds whose soft calls echoed through the trees. Takizo stirred from his uneasy sleep, his body aching, his mind fogged by the memory of battle. For a moment he allowed himself to breathe in the calm, the scent of damp earth, the distant murmur of a stream, the rustle of wind weaving through the leaves. But peace never lingers long for the hunted. As he pushed himself to his feet, a sharp command cracked through the quiet. "Stop right there!" Takizo froze. Emerging from behind the trees were local villagers, 6, maybe 7 of them, armed with long bamboo poles, sickles, and hastily bound ropes. Their faces were tense, wary. In these days after Sekigahara, harboring a defeated soldier was dangerous, but turning one in could earn favor with the new rulers. One man stepped forward, his voice trembling, despite his attempt at authority. "You're Toyotomi, aren't you? A survivor?" Takizo did not answer. His hand drifted slowly toward his cracked wooden staff. The villagers shifted nervously. "We don't want trouble," the man said, "but we can't let you go. Tokugawa soldiers are searching everywhere. If they find we've allowed someone like you to roam free, our families will pay the price." Takezo's heart pounded. Instinct urged him to fight, to break through, to flee deeper into the forest. But he was exhausted, injured, and alone. These were not trained warriors, but decent people caught in the tides of war. People who feared for their homes more than they feared him. Still, desperation flickered through him like a spark in dry grass. He gripped his staff. The villagers tensed. For a moment the forest held its breath. But as he faced them, these ordinary men with tired eyes, something inside Takizo shifted. He felt no hatred towards them, no fury, only the heavy truth that violence would only bind him further to the chaos he was trying to escape. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his staff. A ripple of relief passed through the villagers. They stepped forward cautiously, tying his hands with rope, guiding him out of the forest and toward their village. Every step felt heavy, not with fear, but with a strange, simmering awareness. This was not the end. This humiliation, this captivity, it was another beginning. The villagers spoke quietly among themselves, unsure what to do with him. Some suggested turning him in. Others whispered that perhaps a monk at a nearby temple might know a more merciful path. Takizo listened in silence, the rope scratching against his wrists, the world around him both closing in and opening, slowly, toward a future he could not yet see. The forest behind him faded into the distance, but its lessons, quiet, patient, unyielding, remained. The villagers led Takezo along a narrow path that wound through fields and low hills, the morning sun gradually warming the chill left behind by the night. Though his hands were bound and his future uncertain, he walked with quiet steadiness. Every step felt like a test of patience, of humility, of the fire that still smoldered beneath his calm exterior. After some time, the group reached a modest wooden temple perched on a small rise overlooking the countryside. Its gate stood open, and beyond it, a peaceful courtyard lay dappled in sunlight. Wind chimes tinkled softly, their gentle tones at odds with the tension among the villagers. An elderly monk swept the stone path with slow, deliberate strokes. His robes were simple, his posture slightly bent, yet his presence carried a quiet gravity like a mountain disguised as a man. When he noticed the approaching crowd, he paused and lifted his gaze. His eyes, dark and steady, settled on Takezo. "What brings you all here?" the monk asked, voice soft yet firm. The villagers explained in hurried tones how they had found a fugitive from Sekigahara, how they feared punishment from the Tokugawa forces, how they hoped the monk might offer guidance. The old man listened patiently, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped closer to Takezo, studying him with a gaze so calm it felt like a mirror reflecting more than the boy wished to show. "You are young," the monk murmured, "too young to be carrying the weight of war upon your shoulders." Takezo met his eyes but said nothing. "What is your name?" the monk asked. "Takezo," he replied, voice low. The monk nodded thoughtfully. "I am Takwon Soho." A quiet ripple passed through the villagers. Takwon was well known in the region, a man respected for both wisdom and a certain fearlessness when dealing with powerful lords. After a long moment, Takwon spoke again. "War has ended, but the turmoil within young hearts lingers. Killing him or turning him in will only feed more suffering." The villagers shifted, uncertain. "But what should we do if the soldiers come?" "I will take responsibility," Takwon said simply. There was no argument after that. His words carried the weight of something larger than authority, something closer to truth. He stepped forward and gently loosened the ropes around Takezo's wrists. The fibers fell away. Takezo didn't move. Takwon regarded him calmly. "You have great strength, but it burns without direction. Wild fire destroys. Controlled flame forges steel." Takezo felt those words settle into him, like seeds buried in the earth, small now, but destined to take root. "Come," Takwon said. "You will stay at the temple until we decide your path." Takezo followed, unsure what this meant for his future, but sensing that fate had shifted once again, opening a quiet door where he least expected it. And behind him the villagers slowly dispersed, relieved, grateful, and perhaps a little awed. The temple was small, but its quietness seemed vast, as if silence itself had taken residence within its wooden walls. Takezo followed Takwon through the courtyard, where moss crept over stones, and a single pine tree grew tall and elegant, its branches shaped by decades of wind. Everything here felt deliberate, patient, and calm, the very opposite of the life he had lived until now. Takwon gave him a place to sleep, a simple tatami mat in a side room, and food that tasted humble but warm, rice, miso soup, and a handful of pickled vegetables. Takezo ate silently, the tension in his shoulders gradually loosening. After the meal, the monk led him to the open veranda overlooking the garden. "Sit," Takwon said. Takezo obeyed, but awkwardly, unsure what was expected. "Now," the monk continued, "be still." Stillness, a concept that felt almost impossible for someone whose life had been shaped by conflict, instinct, and constant motion. Takezo shifted uncomfortably. His pulse felt too loud. His thoughts ran wild, memories of the battle, the villagers' fear, the rope around his wrists, the weight of being hunted. The silence pressed against him like water around a stone. Takwon watched him with quiet compassion. "The battlefield is noise," he said, "but the mind can be louder still. If you do not learn to settle it, you will be ruled by it." Takezo clenched his fists. "Sitting here doing nothing, how can that help me become stronger?" "Strength without clarity is chaos," Takwon replied, "and chaos does not win battles. It destroys the one who carries it." The word struck something deep within Takezo. though he did not yet understand them. For days Takuan taught him nothing of swords or combat. Instead, he taught him how to breathe, how to observe, how to listen to the world without seeking to conquer it, how to feel the subtle shifts of his own emotions, anger like heat rising in the chest, fear like a tightening of the stomach, pride like a shadow lengthening behind him. At first, Takizo resisted. Stillness felt like weakness. Quiet felt like surrender. But slowly, something within him began to loosen, like a knot that had been pulled tight for too long. One morning, while sitting alone on the veranda, he noticed the sound of a single bamboo leaf falling to the ground, soft, brief, but clear. For the first time, he realized his mind had grown quiet enough to hear it. A small thing, a simple moment. Yet it felt like the beginning of a change. Takuan, observing from a distance, allowed himself a faint smile. Takezo was not yet the man he would become. But the path was opening, patiently, steadily, like dawn, unfolding across the horizon. Weeks passed at the temple, unfolding gently like petals of a flower opening to the morning sun. During this time, Takezo worked alongside the monks, chopping firewood, carrying water from the stream, sweeping fallen leaves from the courtyard. These tasks were simple, repetitive, humble, but Takuan had given them purpose. Strength is not only in the arm, the monk often said, it is in attention, in intention, in the way you meet the world with each breath. Takezo did not always understand, but he listened. And slowly, the wild tension that had once driven him softened, settling into something steadier, like a river that once raged, now learning the shape of its own banks. But peace could not last forever. Word spread that Tokugawa officials were moving through nearby villages, tracking down the last survivors of the Toyotomi army. Their reach stretched farther each day. The monks heard rumors of men questioned, of suspects imprisoned or killed, of fear tightening its grip on the land. Takezo felt it too, the quiet pressure of danger, the sense that time was running out for him to remain hidden. One evening, as the sky deepened from dusk to indigo, Takuan called him into the small meditation hall. Candles flickered softly, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. "Sit with me," the monk said. Takezo did. For a long moment, Takuan simply observed him, his posture, his breathing, the new calm in his eyes that had not been there before. "You have begun to change," Takuan said. "Not enough to be free of your past, but enough to face it with clearer eyes." Takezo bowed his head slightly. "I am grateful for what you've taught me." "But there is one more lesson," Takuan continued. "A name binds you to your former self. Takezo, the boy tied to chaos, anger, and the war that nearly consumed him, he must be set aside." Takezo looked up, confused. Takuan's voice softened. "Names are like swords, heavy when carried by the wrong hand. But reforged, shaped anew, they become instruments of purpose." He reached for a brush and a strip of white paper. "I give you a new name," he said, writing slowly, deliberately. "Miyamoto Musashi." The ink glistened in the candlelight. "This name marks the beginning of your true path," Takuan said. "A path of discipline, clarity, and mastery. But remember, you must earn it, one breath at a time." Takezo, no, Musashi, felt the words settle deep within him, like roots finding soil, a name like a doorway, a direction, a promise. He bowed deeply, forehead touching the floor. "Thank you," he whispered. Takuan nodded, but added gently, "A name is only the first step. The world outside awaits you." and it will test you far more than I ever could." Outside, the night wind stirred the pine branches, carrying away the last remnants of Takezo. Within the temple, Musashi was born. The morning Musashi left the temple was cool and washed in soft silver light. Mist curled around the base of the pine tree in the courtyard, drifting across the stones he had swept so many times. The world felt both familiar and strangely new, like the first breath after a long sleep. Takuan stood at the gate, hands tucked into his sleeves, watching the young man prepare to depart. Musashi carried no sword, only a sturdy wooden staff and a small bundle of supplies. Yet something in his posture, rooted, calm, alert, suggested he was more prepared for the world than he had ever been. "You walk into uncertainty," Takuan said, his voice steady as the morning air. "Remember your lessons. A mind that still sees more clearly than one clouded by fear or pride." Musashi bowed deeply. "I will not forget." For a moment the monk studied him in silence, the wild youth reborn into someone who might one day wield more than a weapon, someone who might wield wisdom. Then Takuan stepped closer and added quietly, "Do not chase battles. Let challenges come to you. Accept only those that shape the spirit, not the ego." Musashi absorbed the words, though their full meaning would take years to unfold. With a final bow, he turned from the temple and began walking down the dirt path leading into the wider world. The road curved gently between rice fields, shimmering with morning dew, frogs chirping softly from the shallow water. Farmers lifted their heads as he passed, sensing something unfamiliar, an energy not yet refined, but undeniably strong. As he traveled, Musashi felt the world stretch outward like an endless tapestry. Villages buzzed with talk of the new Tokugawa rule. Ronin, masterless samurai, wandered the roads in search of purpose or trouble. Merchants carried news, rumors, hopes, and fears between provinces like drifting leaves, and within Musashi a quiet determination began to deepen. He did not yet seek glory. He did not yet seek to become the finest swordsman in Japan. What he sought was understanding of himself, of the world, and of the strength he sensed but had not yet learned to wield. One evening, after days of steady walking, he reached a riverbank bathed in orange sunset light. He sat and listened to the water rushing over stones, feeling the rhythm of it settle his mind. The world was vast. His journey had only begun. And somewhere ahead, over hills, through forests, across distant provinces, waited the challenges that would define his name. Musashi closed his eyes. The river whispered onward, and the next step of his life quietly awaited him with open hands. Musashi's journey carried him through small towns and quiet farmlands, across wooded hills and narrow bridges, where the water beneath shimmered green and gold. Days folded gently into one another, marked only by the rhythm of his footsteps and the soft, steady breath he had learned to cultivate at Takuan's temple. Yet the world beyond those peaceful lessons held its own tests. It was in the modest village of Hirafuku where Musashi first encountered a challenge that would shape the early reputation of his wandering life. The village sat nestled between rolling hills, its homes built of old timber and thatched roofs, smoke trailing lazily from chimneys. Merchants gathered at the main street, calling out their wares, while children chased each other between market stalls. But beneath the surface calm, Musashi sensed tension. Whispers drifted between villagers, quiet words about an arrogant swordsman terrorizing the town, demanding duels from anyone who refused to bow to him. His name was Arima Kihei, a practitioner of the Shinto-ryu school known for his skill and dangerous temper. Musashi listened from the edge of the crowd. Though the villagers spoke with fear, a flicker of curiosity sparked in him, not out of pride or the desire to prove himself, but from a deeper instinct, the feeling that this meeting was inevitable. As he walked through the village, Arima himself appeared. Dressed in worn but well-kept robes, he carried a long wooden sword, a bakken, held with the ease of a man certain of his superiority. His eyes swept over Musashi, lingering on the staff in his hand. "You there," Arima said sharply. "You look strong. Are you a warrior?" Musashi stopped, calm and steady. "I am a traveler," Arima sneered, "a traveler with the posture of a fighter. I've been seeking opponents worthy of my skill. Will you face me?" The villagers watched from a distance, some hopeful, others fearful. Musashi sensed their desperation to be rid of this terror. Yet the decision had to come from within. He bowed slightly, if it must be so. The duel was arranged in the open square, the setting sun casting long shadows across the dirt. Arima smirked as he took his stance, confident and practiced. Musashi held his staff loosely, not adopting any traditional form. This confused his opponent, who laughed loudly. "Is that how you stand, like a child holding a broom?" Musashi did not answer. Instead he breathed, a slow, centered inhale that grounded him. Arima charged. The moment was swift, almost too swift for the watching villagers to follow. Arima's bakken cut the air with sharp force, aiming directly at Musashi's head. But before the blow could land, Musashi stepped inside the strike, smooth as water, and brought his staff down in a single decisive movement. A cracking sound split the air. Arima fell to his knees, his hand gripping his wrist. His weapon dropped into the dust. The duel had ended before it had even begun. The villagers gasped. Musashi stepped back, calm, respectful. He bowed to Arima, who stared at him with a mixture of shock and humiliation. "There was no need to continue," Musashi said softly. But Arima, pride shattered, crawled away in shame. The villagers, now free of his threat, approached Musashi with gratitude glowing in their eyes. He accepted their thanks quietly, but inside he felt neither triumph nor joy, only a quiet clarity. The duel had shown him something important. Skill was not about force. Victory was not about dominance. And a single moment of understanding could end a conflict before it truly began. As night settled over Hirafuku, Musashi continued his journey, the echoes of the duel following him like distant footsteps. After leaving Hirafuku, Musashi traveled deeper into the countryside, where forests thickened, and the air grew cool with the scent of cedar and mountain streams. His duel with Arima Kihei had stirred something inside him, not pride but awareness, a recognition of potential, a glimpse of a path still only beginning to take shape. Yet the road forward remained uncertain. He walked alone beneath towering trees whose branches interlaced high above him, forming a living cathedral of leaves. Sunlight filtered through in soft beams that flickered across his face and the ground beneath his feet. Birds called from unseen perches, and far away he heard the steady rhythm of a waterfall. Nature, vast and patient, seemed to whisper lessons in a language beyond words. Musashi moved through this world with growing sensitivity. Where once he had charged blindly into challenges, now he paused, observing subtle movements, the shift of wind, the bend of grass, the stillness before an animal startled. Each detail offered insight into timing, balance, and flow. Takwon's teachings lingered in his mind. A still mind sees clearly. Strength without clarity is chaos. Let challenges come to you. These lessons began to weave themselves into his very movements. When he practiced with his wooden staff, the motions felt less like attacks and more like conversations, listening as much as striking. He studied the curve of the river, the arc of falling branches, the spiral of wind through tall bamboo. Nature became his instructor, silent yet profound. One evening, as the sky blushed with the soft pinks of twilight, Musashi settled by a small campfire beside a flowing stream. The flames danced quietly, casting warm light across his features. Smoke drifted upward, disappearing into the vastness of the night. He reflected on the path ahead. There were rumors of great schools of swordsmanship across the land, places where masters refined their arts through strict discipline and inherited tradition. Musashi felt drawn to them, not to imitate their ways, but to test and understand his own. He sensed that his journey would lead him into many confrontations, each one sharpening the edge of his spirit. But unlike the wild youth who once craved conflict without understanding, Musashi now walked with intention. Not every challenge needed acceptance. Not every opponent was an enemy, and not every victory required another's defeat. As stars emerged like scattered sparks across the darkening sky, Musashi closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He felt the steady pulse of the earth beneath him, the soft rustle of night wind through the trees, and the quiet expansion of his own growing awareness. A path of mastery awaited him, a path of discipline, humility, and endless learning. A path where each jewel, each journey, each sunrise would teach him something new about himself and the world. When he opened his eyes again, the fire crackled softly, as though acknowledging his resolve. The night was vast. His journey had only just begun, and the man who would one day become a legend was taking his first true steps toward the way. Thank you for joining this gentle journey through the early life of Miyamoto Musashi, Japan's unbeaten swordsman. May the quiet lessons, the atmosphere, and the unfolding path bring you peace as you rest. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, especially letting us know where in the world you're watching from. Whether it's night in the U.S., Europe, Canada, Asia, or anywhere your evening finds you. Now breathe softly, let the night settle around you, and allow your mind to drift into calm. Until next time, may your dreams carry you gently onward.